Welcome to the State of Mind Virtual Speaker Series. This series has been developed to provide education and support to youth, caregivers, and educators during this challenging time. This series is a collaboration between two local nonprofits, 1 in 5 and MindPeace, and various community mental health partners. We're glad you're here to educate yourself and to learn how to keep your brain in a healthy state of mind.
All right, well, thank you everyone for being with us tonight. I'm Nancy Eigel-Miller and I'm the Executive Director of 1 in 5. And then I'll have Susan introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Susan Shelton, the Executive Director of MindPeace.
And Dr. Sorter.
Yeah, I'm Michael Sorter. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the Division Director of Psychiatry at Cincinnati Children's.
And Dr. Slavin, if you want to introduce yourself and then get us started.
Yeah, so I'm Stuart Slavin. I am Senior Scholar for Wellbeing at the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, and thrilled to be here with everyone tonight. So I will jump into my presentation and I will risk sharing screen. That hopefully this will go smoothly. So thank you again with the patience in terms of the challenges with our technology, but hopefully all will go smoothly. Let's just get this. So, yeah, it's a pressure cooker out there. And I guess what I would start by is saying, it's not just for kids. I think it's a pressure cooker for parents as well. Susan and Nancy and I were meeting with some high school staff today, and I think that is something that we have to acknowledge right from the start. The focus today is really to describe what's going on out there, what we've been able to kind of recognize and see through some survey work that I've been doing with Dr. Sorter and Susan and Nancy with MindPeace and 1 in 5, working with a number of high school districts in Cincinnati region or Cincinnati area. Before I start talking about those findings and kind of the implications in terms of what can we do as a collective community, I just want to give you a little bit of background about my work really over the last decade or so, and how it's kind of informed my view of what's going on in the world of kind of adolescent mental health, which people probably know is tremendously challenged these days. So I started working in well-being. I'm a pediatrician by training and also a medical educator. And I was at St. Louis University working as a dean for curriculum, and started reading more and more about medical student mental health and the serious problems. And I got involved in really leading efforts at St. Louis University to improve the medical student mental health, specifically trying to reduce depression and anxiety rates, that ultimately were incredibly successful. We were able to largely by working on the pressures and demands that medical students were facing, and also helping them develop some skills to enhance their resilience, we were ultimately able to reduce depression and anxiety rates by 80 to 90%, really striking kind of unprecedented improvements in mental health and well-being. I should note, and this is really important, we were decreasing pressures and demands, but one of the other outcomes that's really, really important to note is that academic performance didn't suffer at all. Actually, strikingly, and maybe at the end we can talk about this during the question and answer period, academic performance actually improved. So despite decreasing pressure, despite decreasing demands, we were actually able to not just improve mental health and well-being of our medical students, but also to improve their academic performance. And that kind of experience has really kind of provided me with a lens to look at this issue of adolescent health. And I think what you'll be able to see through this presentation is that there are really some similarities that exist in terms of what I'm seeing in our studies, or our studies of medical students, or of high school students in Cincinnati and other parts of the country, and the experience of medical students. And that's what I'm going to kind of focus in on today. So where we're going, really from results of surveys that we did at 4 high schools across the Cincinnati region. I'll tell you about what we're finding in terms of rates of depression and anxiety. We'll describe student perceptions of the demands and stressors that kids, describe and kind of rate. We'll also describe the role of what I kind of term problematic mindsets that really have been adding to the distress that students feel. And then finally, we're going to discuss what we can do to help our kids. And I'm going to try to keep my comments relatively brief so that we have a good amount of time for question and answer and further discussion, because we'd love to hear from you today as well. So the mental health of teens in our 4 high schools that we studied. There are very well validated screening instruments, survey instruments that have been used actually for decades in populations that can assess depression and anxiety. And these scales can't diagnose depression and anxiety, but once you have identified, kids with moderate to severe symptoms of depression or anxiety, it would be very likely that if they went to see a psychiatrist, they would make that diagnosis. So what did we find? Honestly, it was pretty alarming that before the pandemic, everybody's been focusing in appropriately on the effect of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, 36% of students in our study had moderate to severe symptoms of depression, and this rose to 41% during the pandemic. Looking at anxiety, 42.8% of students had moderate to high levels of anxiety before the pandemic, and this rose to 43.7%. So the implications are significant. I mean, what we're seeing is actually numbers that are probably higher than are seen in kind of national studies, and this is just half of the kids essentially have depression or anxiety, and many suffer from both. So I think what is clear from these findings is that kids in the Cincinnati region in these schools are really struggling with mental health, and it isn't just the pandemic that caused it. There were serious concerns before that that existed and that continue and have been somewhat exacerbated by the pandemic. So those are the mental health findings. What about the time demands? We asked students to estimate, and of course this is, depends on students' ability to estimate accurately what kind of time demands. And so it isn't just school, the school day in which they're spending time. On average, what we found was students reported spending 4.9 hours per day, so almost 5 hours per day, in addition to their school day, studying or participating in extracurricular activities. And so, a pretty, significant amount of time. And what you need to, recognize, this is just an average. So there's, a good number of students who are spending 6, 7, 8, even 9 hours a day in these extracurricular activities and doing homework and studying. And the implications of this is one of the things that I think is being squeezed out in this population is something that's incredibly important for their mental health and well-being, not just for their current mental health and well-being, but it can have an impact on their future mental health and well-being, which is sleep. And what we're finding is that, at least by self-report, students on average report getting 6.7 hours of sleep per night on school nights. And people should recognize that the American Academy of Pediatrics and sleep experts recommend that adolescents should be getting 9 hours of sleep. So this is a substantial sleep deficit, which they cannot make up on weekends. And what I think we all need to understand is the implications for them are substantial, which is that their basic brain functioning, basically their cognition, their ability to problem solve, and their emotional kind of stability is compromised when you have that kind of level of sleep. So this sleep deprivation is a really significant and important issue that kids in Cincinnati and across the country really are facing. Next, let's turn to this issue of stressors. We asked the students to rate some, I guess it was like 35 different stressors. on a scale of 0 to 4, 0 being doesn't stress me at all, 4 it's a really great stressor. And those stressors came from a whole range of different potential elements, was just things like school or academic pressures, achievement pressures, but also family issues, family challenges, problems with boyfriend, girlfriend, social media. During the pandemic, we asked about fear of family members getting sick with COVID, and we even asked about things like climate change. What are the things that are stressing kids out? And the findings were really remarkable in all of the schools, and not just in Cincinnati, all of the schools that I've studied, both in California and Missouri as well. The top 10 to 12 stressors in all of these different environments were all academic and achievement oriented. All academic and achievement oriented. And here are the top 6. So first, interestingly, was pressure from self. So it isn't just external demands and pressure that kids are facing. It all coalesces into pressure that they feel that they put on themselves. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Second is time pressure. The demands are just great and they just don't feel like they have enough time. Third one is I think a huge actually driver of other pressures, which is this pressure to get into a good college, this feeling like if they don't get into a good college or an elite college or the best college possible, that their life may be forever compromised. Fourth one was really interesting. We asked about pressure from parents and pressure to not disappoint parents. Pressure to not disappoint parents actually ranked higher than pressure from parents. So it isn't just the direct, explicit messages that you give to your kids about performance and achievement. It's also the kind of role modeling you do, the values you demonstrate that may also produce and contribute to pressure. Then fear of failing an exam, the amount of homework as well. What's striking about this is this really flies in the face a little bit of what some researchers in adolescent mental health are thinking. And there are a number of very influential researchers saying it's all social media. It's Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all of these kind of things that you can get on your smartphones. And if the kids would just put down their smartphones, everything would be okay. And our findings really fly in the face of that. And social media, I think out of the 35 sources of pressure, it was ranked like 30th. So I won't say that social media doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, it can be an amplifier of some of the stresses that people are feeling, but it doesn't, at least if you ask the kids themselves, it isn't the primary source of their distress. It's a kind of academic and achievement stresses that seem to be the biggest. The other I'll say is sometimes people worry, oh my gosh, our world is a disaster right now. It must be, fears about climate change or gun violence or things like that must be really distressing them. Not the case. I think global climate change came in around 25th in terms of sources of stress, gun violence in a similar range. And this one I think is pretty striking. We asked them about stress from fear. This was in the midst of the pandemic, before we had a significant vaccine. We asked them fear of a family member getting COVID, and that ranked 15th. Didn't even crack the top 10. So I think what's really striking is what clearly the kids are telling us in these surveys is it's the academic demands, it's academic pressures, and it's pressure from multiple parties that are being internalized into them that is this biggest sources of their distress. So what we also have to recognize, and it's really important of findings from our surveys also, was the other drivers of poor mental health in this population. And this really came from some of my work in working with medical students. What I was seeing is what I term these problematic mindsets. And essentially what these are is these mental models, these mental filters that can contribute to distress, not the primary cause of distress, but when interacting with this highly demanding, highly pressured environment, can actually can cause kids to feel more stress. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes running through some of those mindsets that are, I think, most important. really key to say that, kids aren't born with these, mindsets. I don't think they're signs of psychopathology. They've been picked up in this kind of long educational pipeline before high school, and they can continue into college and beyond. These don't kind of magically disappear. And one of the things you may do as parents is like, do I suffer from some of these mindsets? Because I think many of us continue to be susceptible to those. So what are some of them? First is viewing performance as identity. It's getting the experience of getting an exam score that's disappointing. And rather than feeling like I got this score, it's I am this score. It defines me. It is a measure of my self-worth as a person. Greater negative impact on your well-being if you see your performance as who you are rather than what you've done. Second one is comparison. What we see is an incredible level of what's just relentless toxic comparison, where students are always looking at other students. Am I performing better than them? Am I above average? Am I in the top 5th and 10th or 10th percentile? I'm at the top of my class. And this feeling that you only feel good about yourself if you're really out competing everyone else. This next one too often accompanies non-ideal performance, which is personalization and self-blame. And as parents, you may see this if your child comes back and they've done poorly on an exam and they're just beating up on themselves mercilessly. I'm so stupid, I'm never going to make it, and have this kind of internal voice that just is putting all the blame on themselves, and can be a really painful thing for kids and for parents alike. Next, maladaptive perfectionism, which is really been well studied, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically, setting the bar for yourself so you're repeatedly disappointed in yourself. It's why your child may, come home. Some of you may have this experience, where they wanted a score above 95 on an exam and they get a 92. And they just are bereft. They're so upset because they didn't get the 95. That's maladaptive perfectionism is at work. And riding along with that sometimes is imposter phenomenon, this feeling like, you're not capable, you're a fraud, you're not nearly as competent and smart as other people think, and you're only fooling people, and it's only a matter of time before people can, figure it out and kind of unmask you. So those are kind of the mental models. Those are the thought processes. But the other thing that we looked at in our studies is trying to see, like, do the kids feel a sense of inadequacy, embarrassment, or shame about their performance? And what we found, interestingly, in these surveys was if you had comparison, if you had high levels of maladaptive perfectionism, if you had feelings of inadequacy, embarrassment, or shame, if you had any of those, you are much more likely to have higher scores of depression and anxiety. So you can't prove causation with that kind of study, but it really fits with this kind of model from psychology that says thoughts can drive feelings, and feelings can actually contribute to adverse mental health outcomes. And so it isn't just the environments that's leading to distress, and isn't just the environment that's causing this pressure cooker. It's actually these mental models, these mindsets that kids are developing and are incredibly widespread today. The good news is there's hope. And that's where some of the work I'm doing with Cincinnati Schools and with Susan and Nancy and 1 in 5 in MindPeace, we're seeing if we can do something about this, because all of these mindsets are not fixed. Every single one of those can change. But what it requires is helping kids develop a skill set to manage their thoughts and manage their feelings so that they don't have these distorted and kind of harmful, problematic mindsets, that they can learn how to think differently about their own performance and their own, failures and success. And that tool, which is I'm really intrigued by, is cognitive restructuring, which actually forms the basis, the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is still a gold standard treatment for anxiety disorder, very helpful for depression. And actually probably gold standard treatment by therapists for maladaptive perfectionism or imposter phenomenon. But my feeling, and this is what we're really looking at, is why do we withhold these techniques, these cognitive restructuring techniques, until somebody's developed a mental health disorder and is in crisis and needs to see a therapist? What we're trying to say, and this isn't therapy that we're doing in these workshops with teenagers, we're trying to see if we can teach them these skill sets to better manage their thoughts and feelings in ways that are more accurate and that serve them better. So that's something I'm really excited about. We have a pilot study going on this fall in a number of schools, and we're hoping that that's going to have a positive impact. What I should also say, though, is it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. And we think we can make a difference, but there's more that we need to do as a community. And I would say right off the bat, as I kind of close my comments, I'm going to speak briefly about what my ideas about what can be done to kind of change this pressure cooker and support the mental health and well-being of kids. A message that I would say that's so important is no single group is going to fix this. And no single fix is going to make a difference. This is a multifactorial problem, and it needs to have multifactorial solutions. And one of the things I think that we have to really consider as we try to make change is to avoid pointing fingers and say, oh, it's the administrators or it's the schools saying, oh no, it's the parents who are doing this. Everyone is contributing to creating this culture, and everyone has a role in winding it down. So I do think schools have a role to play in trying to figure out, are there ways to reduce pressures and demands on kids in school today? I think that's something that people need to be looking at. But the important thing, as we try to reduce those pressure and demands, I have no interest in reducing lowering academic standards. And my belief is that that we can do something about this, backing off this pressure in a way that doesn't reduce academic standards. And I would hope could raise academic standards, because depression and anxiety are not helpful for academic performance. Profound sleep deprivation is not good for academic performance. So it's almost like we're hobbling our kids. And there are these big factors that are potentially hindering their performance, that if we had well-rested kids who weren't suffering from significant mental health problems, I think that there's a good likelihood that academic performance would actually improve. So the schools, I think, have an important role to play, but parents, I think, also have an important role to play. And I'll say just a bit about this, and hopefully we can, Dr. Sorter maybe can have more to add into this, but that hopefully it can come out in the question and answer and discussion. As I said, there's huge pressure on parents. And as a pediatrician, I've always felt like, the vast majority of parents really make decisions with the best interests of their kids at heart. And I know that there's a sense of worry, like, oh, I've got to help my child on their path to success, that I want to assure their success and their economic security in the future. But what I don't think we're seeing is by kind of an over concern about that, and too much pressure on our kids, too much pressure to get, say you got to get to the best college possible, or you need great grades, or you're going to never succeed in life, that we can actually add to the pressure in a way that's just not healthy for kids. And I will say, one of the things, when we have kids go from high school off to college and things like that, it is not lack of academic preparation that is going to put kids at risk of failure and dropping out and running into trouble. It's mental health issues. So one of the things that worries me terribly is, teenagers, younger kids that suffer from depression and anxiety are much more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety as young adults and on into adulthood. So I think it's incredibly important to play, for us to try to make sure that we're not adding to the pressure as parents, and not contributing to the sense of you have to get to the best college possible, or for some kids you have to go to college at all. I mean, there are other options, and immediately after high school, college may not be the right place for every kid. I also think, finally, that you need to be careful. I think there's enormous pressure on parents to be the best parent possible, and the best parent possible out there, I think still there's the belief that it's like, oh, I'm creating all of these opportunities for these kids. I'm getting them, soccer coach so they can get on the club team, and tutors so they can get in the math track, and that starts early. And so again, I think there's this balance that we have to have in raising kids to provide them with opportunities, but to not overschedule, not overpressure, not make them feel like they have to have 25 different interests and all of these different activities for them to be successful. So I think that's where I will end my comments. I hope it's given some good food for thought, and I look forward to kind of question and answer period. But with that, Nancy, should I turn it over to Dr. Sorter to add his perspective from a psychiatrist, child and adolescent psychiatrist
Yes,
perspective?
that would be great.
Okay, Michael, take over.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you being on the call tonight. And I'm going to just make a few comments because I think there's a lot of questions out there that we want to address. I think what I would just to summarize some of the things that Dr. Slavin just went over is that, a lot of times young people are setting expectations for themselves that are based on multiple things they're pulling from the environment. And a lot of times having a discussion with them very directly about their own sense of their own expectations for themselves is very helpful. The reason being is, kids from very good families, I think, that are very helpful, supportive, loving. A lot of times kids project what they think they need to do to kind of meet approval, or what they need to do to kind of be, seen as successful at school. And a lot of these things are never really spoken or told that you have to be number one, but these young people can kind of begin making assumptions because they want to please. And I think that idea of not disappointing their family. And that's, in some ways, as we can tee that up as a negative, but it doesn't have to be. And the idea is that, really just helping them, I think really bringing up what are the expectations, what would be acceptable, what would be good enough as part of the discussion between you and your child. And so the idea that a lot of times lack of communication about these things is oftentimes leaves a vacuum where all of a sudden assumptions are made, where it may be too strong, too stringent, too punitive, when really no one has that intention. So I think, and I think the same thing is true for the schools, that unless we kind of really start talking about these things openly about how people succeed or what is success, there's going to be kind of negative assumptions or going to be exaggerations of that. And so that's why I think it's so important that we have an open discussion about this. The other thing I think what Dr. Slavin was talking about is really we're trying to instill some coping skills for people. And because these are anxiety-provoking situations, there's big exams, there's final exams, there's promotions, there's all these things that there are things that do escalate anxiety. And so how do we give people the tools so that in the moment they can begin exercising, different patterns of thinking, different ways of processing information, so they're not assuming the worst or assuming kind of the ultimatum type feelings they oftentimes have. So I think that the goal of the program is really to help the students, of course, families, and the school to become kind of really, I think, work together to realign some of these internalized thoughts and expectations that the young people have. And I think there's, in the schools that were part of this survey, in some ways we're talking about stressors and all that are significant and serious, but they're ones that really stem oftentimes from a very supportive system where one is looking for good outcomes and positive things. It's not for some of the schools that we deal with in other ways, where it's stressors around safety or being in danger and things like that. That's not the problem here. The problem here is, how do I set expectations for myself and move ahead and feel good about what I'm doing? So I'll just leave it at that, because I know we have a lot of questions and we have about a little bit about a half hour to engage in that if we'd like. So I turn it over to Susan or Nancy.
Thank you, Dr. Sorter, for your perspective on that. We have a couple different questions here. The first is, this is quite an undertaking, which I feel will take years to switch, for to have the switch of mindset. What actual steps can we take to help our kids? Stuart, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to jump in on that first? And I'd love to hear what Dr. Sorter would say as well. Does that sound good? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now, you know what's striking about these mindsets? No, I think with cognitive restructuring, you actually, it may not be immediate, but I think that that kids actually can kind of adapt to new ways of thinking relatively quickly, and it can make a difference. So I wouldn't discount that as a possibility. I think that kids can make progress really relatively quickly. I think that what I would do is kind of echo what Dr. Sorter was saying, which is, I mean, make your expectations clear. And I'll just talk about my experience with my kids was basically, you know, what was most important to me when I saw them as, you know, I wanted them to be good people, you know, who acted with integrity and kindness and treated people with respect. And related to academics, I wanted a reasonable effort. I mean, to me, that was what mattered. And whatever the grades came or didn't come, so be it. To me, you know, one of the things I think we need to help kids realize is it isn't just your performance that's going to influence the grade. I mean, there are all sorts of other factors. What is the teacher looking for? Does it match what you're giving? So to me, I think keeping it simple in terms of what Dr. Sorter was saying, in terms of what are your values, and can you communicate that to your kids in a way that is really supportive. I will say, though, even if you do that as a parent, what's going on is the rest of the culture is giving them a different message. And that's why I think it's not just up to the parents alone. We can't fix that alone. If the rest of the culture is still screaming at your kid that you better get straight A's and get into an Ivy League college, or, you know, an elite school, or you're not as worthy. So I don't know if that was an adequate enough of a question, but I think, you know, just being supportive of our kids, trying to instill in them the values that you value as a human being, I think is probably most important. But Michael, what's your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, well, I think is what very much along the same lines. What we can do now is really, how do we let our children know really how much we love them, how much we really, you know, think they're special. And my sense is so much of this is around really someone seeking, all of us, and especially the kids in this situation, seeking positive affirmation.
Yeah.
They want to be seen as having a talent, that they can contribute something. There's something good about who they are, what they're going to do in the future. And a lot of times, regretfully, that gets boiled down into numbers or a percentage of questions right. And that's really not where we want it to be. And so I think part of it is, you know, everyone has, and this is true for, you know, very successful families. Everyone's so busy and gets pulled away and distracted. So things get boiled down to these kind of points, and it could be a grade point average. It could be, are you starting at that position? It could be, you know, are you president of the club? Things of that nature. And these are innocent questions. But on the other hand, is they kind of leave gaps in there about, what do you feel special about my own interest and what I want to be? There's one of the things we use a lot with families where kids are having trouble is a type of therapy called parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT it's called. It's very helpful, oftentimes used with younger children. And what it's really focused on is parents giving positive affirmation for their kids 5 to 10 times for any correction. And the idea is really so the child begins to look at their parent as someone that is always demonstrating some kind of caring attitude towards them, and that they are really kind of seeing themselves as something positive. And I just, one of the things I would just ask people to reflect on is the idea of, and again, it's hard. These are hard things. It sounds easy, but it's very hard. And that is how much just positive affirmation is going on. And I think just speaking very plainly about, hey, you did a good job on that, or this looks really good. I'm so glad you're here for dinner. or, it was really nice to see you enjoy yourself when you were with your friends. The idea that normal everyday life can be really special. And I think as you get older, like I am, and the kids are out of the house, you begin cherishing all the moments you had together with them. And I think really kind of highlighting that positive relationship so that they get the message that they know that you think they're special. And that can be really with whatever they do. And I think it's a message that goes on right now, because we don't want people striving for something to kind of prove the point. And I think a lot of times when you see, as Dr. Slavin laid out very nicely about all the different maladaptive ways to think this through, the common theme is really, how am I going to be noticed to be something special? So that's what I would say to people, that that's something that can happen in the home right now. And I think at school too.
Yeah.
And how do school personnel communicate with kids?
Yeah, Mike, that's great. One other thing I would just throw in too that just hit me as well. I think this is maybe the hardest thing to do as a parent too, is I think there's a tendency, and I plead guilty to this with my kids, is to jump in too quickly to solve their problems. Kids are not going to be resilient if they don't learn how to stumble and pull themselves up by themselves, without you kind of grabbing onto them and pulling them up as well. So that's a hard thing to do, but sometimes, letting your child struggle a little bit with challenges and try to work things out and figure things out, I think is one of the other things that we can also do as well. Susan or Nancy?
All right, so the next question is for Dr. Sorter, I think. What would be the best way to mentally prepare a senior for their first year of college if they're struggling with anxiety and depression over school?
Okay, a great question. I think, first of all, think of it as establishing a continuation of the relationship at home, but changing. And that it's not preparation for one trip, it's a preparation for a whole transition period. And so I think the idea of acknowledging that there's going to be some struggles, and there's going to be some times where, someone is anxious and worried. And this is where the communication back to you as a family member can really be helpful. The idea that, your plan, even a little bit of a structure of how we're going to connect. And then I think the support that you can offer in those frequent contacts is very, very important. Mm-hmm. The other piece is that, so many of our colleges now have much more robust systems of helping students as they come in. This has been kind of a slow coming revolution about really student well-being. And so there's a lot more opportunities if there needs to be kind of more of a counseling or aspect to it. But I think schools also know that kids are very anxious coming in. And so getting involved with, if they can, engaged, I should say, probably is the better word, getting engaged to things that kind of make it fun for them, where they can meet other people, can also be of assistance. So my sense would be is having frank talks about anxiety, making sure the individual child knows that this is going to be something that everyone's working with together to manage. And then transitioning some of that contact with the supports at school.
And maybe, Michael, I'll add in a couple other things, because one of the things that interests me in looking at physicians and medical students and training, et cetera, is the stresses associated with transitions. Right. So going from this high school where you knew everybody and there, the teachers, and you had your support system, et cetera. And then you go off to this college and suddenly those transitions, it can feel disorienting, and things like imposter phenomenon can flare, where you go, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm completely incompetent. I'm incapable. I've been actually working with freshmen college students, and they suffer from all of these same things. So to let your child know, like, don't be surprised if that transition is going to be difficult. It's difficult for everybody, right? But it gets better. Right? It gets better. And this idea that, oh no, when they're in the depths of struggle in the first month or two, they may say it's never going to get better. And I think reassuring them as they get more comfortable, like they will feel better as things go along, I think is also really important. So just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Slavin. The next question is going to be for Dr. Slavin. How do you help your child foster a growth and resilient mindset?
Hmm. You know, I think the growth mindset, you can be pretty explicit and use the language of saying that, you know, your abilities and intelligence and, you know, capabilities are not fixed. You know, everybody can learn to grow and in all sorts of way. And I mean, certainly kids can relate to the fact that they're learning new things all the time. And what they I think is important is not just having a growth mindset about their academic ability, but to have a growth mindset about their resilience, their ability to handle adversity, their emotional intelligence. I mean, the act of a human being is all about growth. And so I think just being, you know, open about being, sharing your perspectives and your own ideas about how you've grown as an adult, I think is really important because sometimes I think teens and kids have this idea that no, you were always like this. You know, you always seem to have your act together or whatever. I mean, certainly my kids, I think, felt that. And I used to tell them, oh my God, I was a mess when I was an adolescent. You know, I was like, holy moly, I was just a disaster. And so that you know, giving them the sense that no, you know, you've achieved something in life, but it wasn't a simple and narrow straight path that got you there.
Okay. Dr. Sorter, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, just, I think the idea of sharing stories about yourself.
Hmm.
I mean, I think we all have areas where we've had to stumble, pick ourselves up, and I think the idea of you know, we were talking about those expectations earlier about I'm afraid of disappointing my parents. You know, kids will kind of actually construct in their own minds. You know, oftentimes, you know, my parents do this for me, they do that for me. They're great.
Mhm.
And a lot of times they don't realize that sometimes there's been struggles or there's had to be hurdles overcome or there's been mistakes made. And I think sharing some of that and how you kind of managed yourself, you know, makes yourself a little bit vulnerable. On the other hand, shows to them that, you know, these are challenges that, you know, look, face a lot of people, and that with help and with support, people can overcome that. So I think that kind of sharing that personal stories can be really helpful.
That storytelling is always so important, that connection.
Yeah.
All right. The next question would be for Dr. Sorter. How do you know if your child should seek help for a medical professional for anxiety and depression?
Yeah, I think when you start seeing that there is interference with what the child's trying to do, I kind of look at it this way, that all of us have three jobs. We have all of us have a job of kind of being part of a family and being a productive part of that and relating in a positive way to the people that we love the most. And then, of course, we all, you know, have a job with kind of a social life where we want to make connections with others and have it be a productive interaction, not one that we're leading each other down a negative path, but one where we're kind of lifting each other up and we enjoy it. And then the third one, it's a little bit different. For kids, it's school. And for adults, it's usually some type of career. And when you see the anxiety begin to impair those, that's when you kind of know that, look, we're starting getting in a spot where, you know, probably additional help may be needed. And so if you've had these discussions with your young person and you're still seeing like, look, we're stumbling, we're beginning to kind of suffer in those areas, then it would be clear, I think, to kind of go get some help. So when you see that functional impairment, it would be a clear indicator. Also, if you just, a lot of the times kids can go keep it all together or pretend to keep it together. And so if you can kind of sense or they talk to you about the internal pain they may be feeling, then that's another indicator of going to go get help. And so, you know, that can start with your pediatrician. It could start with a school counselor. it could start with a lot of the schools that this program's at has actually school-based therapists there. So those are all kind of areas where you kind of getting some outside help to kind of direct what might be needed. It would be very important.
Hey, Michael, can I add on to that question? My sense is sometimes kids may not even be willing or able to either say that they're depressed or may not even realize they're depressed. And one of the things, I don't practice pediatrics anymore, but before it seemed like sometimes there could be behavior changes that might suggest depression. I mean, things like, oh my goodness, I'm sleeping all the time, or they're not sleeping, or you see appetite changes, or they're withdrawing, they're not seeing their friends. Are there, is that accurate still in some sense that they, may not just come out and say they're depressed or may not have impairment of school, but that they're exhibiting some changes in behavior that can be kind of concerning?
Well, good point. Usually with more severe depression, you can start seeing kind of physiologic signs.
I see.
Where someone has disturbance in their sleep, either too much or too little. It could be disturbances in appetite, again, too much or too little. Child who's gaining or not gaining, or child who may be losing weight or not making their weight gains over time as they should as they grow. But the other ones are like changes in concentration. Then you'll impact school. Changes in an energy level would be another one. Thoughts about self-harm, of course, would be something to seek care for right away. The other thing for a lot of times is young people, depression is kind of an abstract term. It kind of takes, how am I doing, measuring myself about certain symptoms, then kind of coming to the conclusion I'm depressed. A lot of times, especially in younger children, they may not have that awareness. And to be able to think at that kind of abstract level, they're just not mature enough yet to get there. So that kind of diminished pleasure in usual activities and interest. And so that idea of hard to have fun. The things that used to be fun aren't fun anymore. That is when you really need to be thinking the child has depression. And so I think that's what I actually see the most that kind of come to light the easiest, because people can understand that. It's like, the pleasure is kind of gone. When you see that, then I think you have a problem. And that's actually in many ways one of the core themes of what we've been talking about is here you are, you're living your life at school, you're trying to go about doing a good job, and all of a sudden the pleasure is kind of ripped out of it. And so that's a sign of anxiety, depression, and oftentimes the need for more.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Slavin, there's a question. Is there a book or resource you recommend that parents or teachers can read to learn more about helping kids to shift their mindset?
Yeah, I wish I could recommend one. I think the next thing I need to do, because sometimes people ask me, I think I need to write one. But Michael, maybe you have any ideas. Do you think there's anything out there that you're aware of that really
well, I think it's a great question. I don't have one that things on positive parenting would be where I would start. But I think this area about mindset in schools is really relatively new. And so I think the idea, I don't know of one right offhand that focuses on this specific issue. But things that focus on positive parenting really do address it.
And do you know Daniel Siegel's work at all, Michael, at all? I know he's written some books on that kind of positive parenting. That might be one option, though I don't know his work enough to really recommend it, but that might be a thing to look at. And then Nancy and Susan, it makes me think that maybe what we should be doing also is putting together some videos or podcasts for parents. We're working on helping kids with this, but I think it might be worth, trying to put something together that we could post on your websites as well, because I'm not sure that there are great resources out there right now. As Dr. Sorter said, this is relatively new. And we're just starting to kind of understand and explore how best to deal with these issues.
Yeah, we can definitely, Susan and I can work, and we can put a list together, and then we can get it out that we can post on our website and social media.
And the podcast idea, I think, is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would not be difficult to do. It's something we should try to do something, because I think during this visit to Cincinnati, I really realized, we're doing a lot for the kids, but I think we need to create some resources for parents as well.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so the next question is, how do you set expectations? Stuart, this is probably for you. How do you set expectations early in a child's educational career that reduces pressure later in their teen adult lives?
Yeah, I think really the messaging that I said before, which is it's less important what kind of grades you get, and rather are you being diligent in your effort, are you being a responsible student, etc., and not focusing too much on what kind of grades and performance they're bringing home. And that starts early. The challenge again, though, is sometimes it feels, I think that I felt like this, that my voice was the only voice in the wilderness. And so they go to school and they're surrounded by kids who are, already feeling like performance pressure. So I still think it's a worth a try to do that. And again, I think it's not just school. This is a really important thing, I think, is that I think there's a strong tendency early in life, and I think we've all as parents been guilty of this, of just like trying to offer your kids too many opportunities, like to get better at something. Oh, you need to have at least one sport and maybe 3 sports, and if you're going to be in a sport, you better be in the club, team, and on the traveling circuit, and we'll make sure you're the best, soccer player ever, and those kind of things. Again, I think those come out of very positive motivations, for your kids' success. But if they're pushed too early, it gives the message that what I care about is your performance, not who you are and the kind of person you are. So I do think if we can relax as parents and yeah, just slow things down a little bit. Don't feel like your kids have to be busy all the time. Um,
Yeah.
we were remarking earlier, just like the difference in parenting now compared to my 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 parents, when like we were neglected. We were like free range children. We'd get on our bikes after school and we'd be home by dark, kind of thing. And so I think that if we can, we're never going to go back to those days, but if we can kind of ease the pressure a little bit, I think early in childhood, I think that would be great.
Dr. Sorter, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Well, I think, it's true for the adults too. I know all over the places where I'm working is people are talking about work-life balance.
Yeah.
And it's kind of getting you to kind of slow down and think about what's important to you and what you're doing and how hard you're working, and, people taking vacation or not, you get into some really wild situations. Some ways it's not just a bad mantra to think about for a young person. What's
Yes.
their work-life balance? In some ways, that idea of there's got to be time for them to pursue the thing that they're passionate about, that gives them pleasure, that they're engaged with. And a lot of times from that is you can kind of build up, things that you kind of enrich that experience. So my sense is that the other piece is really constant communication about it. Is again, is that they're going to internalize from you, with good parents, they're rarely are they pushing kids. That's not what happens as much as the kids are pushing themselves to try to live up to an expectation that they imagine the parent has.
Right.
And so I think it's communicating about that. That's not true for everyone. There's other kids that have, struggles with motivation and they need some help to get motivated. But a lot of these kids we're talking about, they're very motivated. And what we're trying to do is help them redirect that.
Right.
And so part of it needs to be kind of, look, how are you enjoying yourself? What is it that's, kind of, fun for you? Because you want them to be able to walk away from the experience of high school or wherever it may be saying, that was an enjoyable 4 years. I learned a lot. Man, did I learn a lot. But at the same time, boy, I kind of had some really nice experiences that it was fun. And
That,
not,
that balance.
yes.
Mike, I want to ask another question of you kind of related to that. I think sometimes too, um, kids are kind of intuitive about us and our emotions. I think they read our emotions really well. So those who are, understandably worry about their kid's success or worry about or even are anxious about their kids, progress and success. I think kids can feel that. And so I think trying to kind of relax yourselves about them, not try to like cover it up. Cover it up if you need to, but if you can just um, let go of some of the worry. I think that's one of the things that's maybe most important. Times there are times to worry, there are times to be anxious. But if that's kind of pervading your life, I think that kids can intuit that and start to adopt some of that worry themselves. Does that make sense? No,
Yeah.
I'm
Uh-huh.
speaking as a layperson there, Mike, so
Yeah.
I need help from a professional. Yes.
Well, again, as that helps them, or actually, they're going to put together in their own mind, what are the expectations to help
Yeah.
me,
Mhm.
help me have my parents relax about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Or because they don't want to. These high functioning kids we're talking about, many of them, the last thing they want to do is really upset their folks.
Yes. Yes.
And so they're going to be looking for symbols or signals, I should say.
Yeah.
That kind of are they getting upset with me?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think, to your point, is being anxious about kind of that next test isn't kind of what you want to communicate to them.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time here. I want to thank Dr. Slavin and Dr. Sorter for being with us tonight and for sharing their expertise on this topic. Well, as we said, we'll be doing the research here in Cincinnati, and we'll continue to be addressing this issue with parents and with the schools. We'll continue to push out information on both the 1 in 5 and the MindPeace website. And we're recording this tonight, and we'll be posting it out on our YouTube channel. Susan, you'll probably post it out on yours as well.
Yes, Nancy, and I also want to say thanks to the schools who are partnered with us. There are about 14 schools across our region, and they've been really interested and have come with open hearts around how can they help. And really, there's some of the few folks in the country that are doing this kind of work. So I think we can be excited about that, and we sure appreciate their partnership.
Right. It's been a joy to work with them. They're very open to the conversation and to doing more discovery, which I think is really exciting.
Mm.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. We'll give you back 2 minutes of your time, and hopefully we'll continue, as I said, to share resources with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. Good luck with all of your efforts, and appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A special thank you to our State of Mind speakers and to you for joining us. More videos and educational resources can be found at 1 in 5's website. If you feel like you or your child is in need of professional support, therapists are available. Please refer to MindPeace's school-based or community resource page. For a mental health crisis or emergencies, patients and families are encouraged to contact their current mental health provider first. This allows the mental health provider who knows your child best to provide support and direction. If your child does not have a mental health provider and they are experiencing a non-life-threatening mental health crisis, you are encouraged to contact the Psychiatric Intake Response Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. 513-636-4124. Call 911 or go to the emergency department if you are experiencing a medical emergency, a life-threatening mental health crisis, or are directed to go there by a medical provider. This will help limit the spread of COVID-19 in our community and allow our emergency departments to care for patients with the most critical needs first.